All right, well, it looks like quite a few people have joined us here. So, and it looks like we have quite a few of our PAC members. So I think maybe we can get started. Thanks everyone for joining us at the fourth meeting of our Congestion Pricing Policy Advisory Committee. That's not counting the voluntary sessions we've had recently. And I'm Colin Dentalpost, the studies project manager and a planner here at the Transportation Authority. And we appreciate your patience as we've done a couple of these virtually, but we're still trying new things today. So we'll see how it goes and appreciate your patience with any glitches that we may experience. Let's see, it looks like some more people are getting in here. So looking at our agenda here, first we're gonna go over some meeting logistics, and then we'll have introductions. And then we have three main agenda topics for today. The first is a discussion about coronavirus and the study and how we should respond to the current situation. Then we'll share and talk about the updated version of the goals and metrics that we talked extensively about at our last PAC meeting. And then we'll review the technical process for screening different congestion pricing scenarios and get your thoughts on that. And then there will also be time for public comment at the end of the meeting, as well as at the goals and metrics item. And I need to move forward our slides here. Again, I'm Colin, I'll be facilitating the meeting. We have two tech experts here who will be helping with any technical difficulties you experience. So those are Paige and Abe. So please do contact them if you have any technical difficulties during the process, so you can chat them in the chat window. As I facilitate, will have difficulty responding to chats, so please do contact them first. And you can also, I'll note, download today's agenda and materials if you need to on our website. You can find that at sfcta.org/PAC4. And then I'll now hand it over to Paige to talk about how we're using Zoom today.
Thanks, Colin. So just a quick tutorial for anyone who's new to Zoom. Down in this dashboard on your screen, if you're using your computer, you can see the participants button where you can see who's participating in the meeting. And you can also click on the chat button, which allows you to chat currently with just the people who are co-hosts in the meeting. And then next on the bottom left, you can find the button where you can mute and unmute yourself. We have by default muted everyone because there are so many people in the meeting right now. And on that left-hand side, you can also start or stop your camera. And if you're on your phone and not using your computer, to mute and unmute yourself, you use the command of *6. And I think we skipped a slide. There we go. So similarly, if you're on your phone and you want to raise your hand, you can use *9. And if you're using your computer, you can find it either on the right-hand side panel of your screen. Sometimes it appears, I think depending on your version of Zoom, if you're clicking on chat, and sometimes if you're clicking on participants. So if you have any issues, feel free to chat Abe or me. And then for our PAC members that are tuning in on your computer, we encourage you to right-click your name in the participants panel just to update your name with your name and your organization so we know who you are. And for members of the public, we will have 2 opportunities for public comment during the course of the meeting. That'll be 1 minute per person. And we will open up the chat box so you can also provide feedback during the public comment periods during chat. And as a note, we're just taking some precautions to prevent abuse or spam of the chat function. So we will be only turning on the chat function during the public comment periods and during one additional period, like a discussion period during the meeting. And so please hold any feedback that you want to share with a larger team to submit via chat during these public comment periods or during the discussion period. And we hope we don't have to turn the chat off if there's any abuse or spam coming in through the chat, but that might be something we have to do just as a precaution. And chat feedback will be added to the record of the meeting. So anything that you say in chat will also be a submitted comment. And if you are a member of the public and you're joining us on your phone, just a reminder that during the public comment periods, that *9 and *6 commands can help you A, raise your hand with *9, or B, mute and unmute yourself by using *6. And if you're having any trouble, feel free to chat Abe or me if you can chat. And if you're having any additional trouble, you can text the number on the screen.
So now I'll do some introductions of who on the congestion pricing team is here. We've already covered me and Paige, so thanks for that update on how the meeting's going to work. Abe, again, is tech support, so chat the two of them if you're having any issues or text. And then other members of our team are Drew Cooper from the technical side of our house here at the Transportation Authority, Rachel Hyatt and Priyoti Ahmed, who are other planners and will be helping facilitate breakout sessions, and then Kim Venegas and Eric Young from our communications team, as well as Brooke, Julia, and Paisley, all from our other parts of our communication team, will all be helping to facilitate some of the breakout sessions. So depending on the breakout sessions you end up in, you may work with any of them. So we're going to now ask PAC members to introduce themselves. So I'll ask Abe to make the chat window publicly available. We're going to ask only that PAC members use it at this point. So PAC members, if you could use the chat window to introduce yourselves to everyone via chat. So just select everyone in the two and tell us who you are and your organization so that everyone can see who's here. If you don't have access to the chat window, you can raise your hand and I can call on you to introduce yourself verbally. And if you're calling in, again, you can press *9 to raise your hand, and then I can call on you so you can introduce yourself. So I'll just pause a minute for PAC members to do introductions, and really appreciate all of you joining us today and your time. And I see a number of folks are here already, too many for me to look and count. And I don't see any hands raised. So it looks like everyone is able to do this in the chat window. Okay. Well, again, thanks so much for joining us and welcome. So maybe we can keep the chat window open there for just another minute in case anyone else is still working on that. And meanwhile, I will get us started with our first main agenda item. So this is a discussion of coronavirus, which of course is at the top of everyone's mind right now as we all have our lives upended and try to keep ourselves and our families healthy. And we, of course, also recognize that congestion has mostly vanished, and we don't know exactly what the future is going to look like. So we're dealing with all of that, but we also know that in the past, our economy has been resilient, and that the pandemic is spurring us and other cities to think about what we want our future to look like, and thinking about the work we do now as a way to help us plan and prepare for what that recovery could look like. So we want to hear from you and hear your thoughts on what all this means for our congestion pricing study and how we should move forward. And so we'll have hopefully a great discussion of that today. Looking back at the past that really wasn't so long ago, but feels so long ago, before shelter in place began, we had several really great community workshops in the Excelsior, the Bayview, and the Tenderloin, together with awesome community partners. And we pulled people together to get really excellent input through a game where people played with trade-offs to tell us what their vision of an equitable congestion pricing program could look like. And here are some of the folks who we were working with there. Unfortunately, we've had to, of course, pause in-person outreach for the time being since then. And we're now working on identifying new ways to connect with the public. And we've also been reaching out to all of you to hear from you one-on-one and hear more about how you're responding and how your organizations are doing amid the pandemic. And we've been able to check in with almost everyone on the PAC. So we have a couple more meetings coming up this week and are still trying to get something on the calendar with a couple more organizations. And what we've learned so far is that, not surprisingly, the CBOs and organizations that are doing direct service are feeling pretty overwhelmed and really busy trying to make sure that the clientele and people they are serving have their basic needs met. So that's having organizations get stretched in new ways and in difficult situations. Meanwhile, services or organizations that aren't doing direct service are less overwhelmed, but people are still busy, and many of our PAC members are, of course, as are many of us, balancing their family commitments and trying to figure out how to get things done in new situations. We did have one organization tell us that they need to pause their participation on the PAC for now, given the capacity constraints that they're under. But all of the others did say that they're able and really want to continue participating as we figure out how to move forward here. Most of the PAC members we talked to encourage us to move forward with co-creation in a couple of months with some caveats. Obviously, some people in the populations we're trying to reach particularly may not be able to participate in certain kinds of formats like Zoom meetings. So we may need to adjust how we do co-creation based on the capabilities and resources that folks have available. Some organizations also offered and said they would love to help us organize and connect with people. So we're in conversation with some of the CEOs to explore how we can do remote co-creation opportunities and also other kinds of focus groups with people in their communities. And finally, there was general agreement among almost everyone that we should move forward with the goals vote. And so we have put that on our agenda today, although folks did say we should continue monitoring conditions, of course, and maybe we need to adjust things, later as we identify what a new normal is going to look like. So things that we've been thinking about in terms of ways we might need to adjust our approach. As I was starting to say, we're working on developing more remote outreach options. We'll talk about that some more. We are continuing with the technical analysis that we can do right now, given what we know so far. And we'll continue to monitor conditions and identify how congestion pricing program could respond to conditions as they continue to develop. So some of the ideas that we've developed and started to talk about with our co-creation CBO partners are how we could do those sessions remotely. It's obviously not as great as having everyone together in a room, but we could have a system where we have community members sign up for a session time. Maybe we do them in smaller groups or individually, and people could either engage in the activities online, or potentially, if that's not an option, receive physical kits in the mail, and then we either do a webinar or a call with people to kind of go through the materials and the activities remotely. And then we could also encourage collaboration with people in their households or friends, so that it's interactive with people that they're close to, and we can still get some of the kinds of feedback that we were getting through the in-person co-creation. Other outreach ideas to reach the broader public, in addition to the focused co-creation events, we are thinking about an online version of our co-creation activities. So we've got a developer working on concepts there, which would be a broader way to gather public input. We can also do open houses virtually, and we can also, of course, interact with stakeholder groups that are interested in doing remote presentations and meetings. Ways in which we may need to adapt or thinking about adapting our policy design. Obviously, kind of maybe the first thing we should say is we don't need, and nor would we implement, a congestion pricing program in the middle of a pandemic and the deep recession that we find ourselves in right now. So we'd be thinking about how to build it in more as part of or something that happens when our economic recovery has happened. And given the struggles that people are going through right now, we want to think even more about ways that we can focus on equity and affordability. And lastly, we do want to think about how this could be part of a recovery picture and work together with an economic recovery, so that we get the jobs back, but we don't get some of the things that come along with it, among them traffic congestion and increased air pollution and traffic collisions. So that's how we're thinking about how we may want to move forward, but we want to hear more from you in terms of your thoughts about these ideas and what other ideas you might have. So we're going to move into breakout sessions for discussion, which is a new experiment on Zoom, so bear with us here. I'm going to hand it over to Brooke and Julia from Reflex Design, who can facilitate this part of the meeting and help get us moving into our breakout session. So thank you.
Hi, thanks, Colin. And so like Colin shared, we want this to be a conversation because we definitely want to be learning from the experience of just kind of how everyone's navigating this and what you're learning from your different communities about what's necessary. And so what we're going to do is use Zoom's breakout small group function. And Paige is going to move all of the PAC members into small groups, like we're sitting at small tables. And so she's going to announce to the main room when all of the PAC members have been moved into those smaller groups. And so our members of the public, you will stay in the main room. And Abe from the SFCTA is going to open the public chat so members of the public can share thoughts on these discussion prompts that Colin has on the screen right now. And so before we go anywhere, you do want to note that if you are a PAC member who has both called in and is on the computer, please chat Paige to let her know so she can make sure that both your phone and your computer screen are in the same room. But other than that, we're just going to take a few minutes to run through these questions and get your thoughts on our ideas for how we're proceeding.
Great. Thanks, Brooke. So I'm about to press go on breakout rooms. So everybody will get moved over into a smaller version of Zoom. And we'll go ahead and wrap those up in about 15 minutes. And each room will have a facilitator and a note taker. And if you are a PAC member and you are not in a breakout room, after I press go, please let me know and I will add you to one.
And I'll just add that after this, we will have a session where everyone comes back together and has a report out so that we can all hear what all the different breakout sessions we're talking about.
All right.
your hand in the.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Is everyone back here? I think so. So, well, thanks for breakout session. We can discover through this how difficult it can be to finalize your last point when you have a countdown clock that's going to cut you off. But fortunately, we have a little more discussion here with our share out sessions. And so let's see. We can move on to that. And so now everyone gets to figure out which room they were in. So room 1 was Julia and Paisley were the facilitator and note taker. So I think I will turn it over to them to summarize what the key points of that room's discussion. And then once we go through these summaries, we can also, folks who were PAC members who were in those groups can also add anything they feel like was important that was missed coming out of their discussions.
Great. So we were group 1, and there wasn't a lot of suggested changes to what we had talked about. People said it seemed thoughtful, which is great, but they also wanted to know a little more information, especially around the timeline of the study itself and the implementation. And so for the most part, though, we were talking about what to think about as these circumstances keep changing. So seeing that telecommuting has become a big thing. And so can we build off of that? But on the flip side of it, as recovery starts to happen, places like China have seen, even more congestion than before because people who have cars are driving them over public transit. So that was another concern or something to think about, is how to maintain social distancing in a public transit system, and how do we accommodate that and balance safety and capacity. And then thinking also about how this is impacting the economy, and from a business perspective, labor, this could have implications around labor as well, since telecommuting might become a larger thing.
All right. Thanks, Julia. If anybody else from room 1 wants to just add anything that Julia missed, feel free to raise your hand. I don't see anyone yet, so maybe in the meantime we can move on. Oh, we have Chris here. Go ahead, Chris.
Thanks, Colin. Just one thing that I didn't get a chance to mention in the room, but it will sound like a shameless plug, so I apologize for it. But the SFMTA is working with the entire taxi cab industry to make sure that there is more of a contactless experience when we're transporting customers. So we're talking about driver shields that will separate the driver compartment from the passenger's compartment. And then we have all the equipment available in the taxi cabs where customers don't have to interact with the driver at all. And that's something that the city's working with us on to promote and move forward when we start to get back to normal.
Great, thanks, Chris. Okay, I don't see any others from room 1, so let's move on to room 2, and that was Rachel and Kim.
Yes, so we talked about just the amount of uncertainty regarding how travel behavior will change, how willingness to take transit will change, how we might see increases in driving and congestion because social distancing on transit is hard to do. So just making the observation that so much is uncertain about what the new future will look like. But that said, the summary that you gave, Colin, seemed an accurate summary of conversations. We talked about the importance of, we talked about that right now in this immediate moment is not a good time for outreach because so many immediate matters of paying rent and getting food on the table are top of mind. So outreach will need to wait a little bit. And that when we do, so we need to make sure to tailor the outreach to the specific communities we're trying to reach. Seniors, for instance, may not have the technology access, so doing the recommendations like mail and phone, we'll just need to work with our partners to make sure that the technology approach is accessible.
All right, thanks, Rachel. Anyone else from group 2 that wants to raise your hand and add something you think was missed there? I don't see anyone so far. So in the meantime, let's move on to room 3. And oh, that's me. So our group talked about some of the same themes. So certainly the uncertainty in terms of what's going to happen. And we talked about a few different aspects of that, kind of whether the question again about telecommuting and whether that's going to be a permanent shift to people's behavior. Also, how we could work with the potential shifts that people might be already making, both besides telecommuting in the open streets movement to have more walking and biking, and whether that is something that can be kind of integrated, or how that relates to our study. So we can think about that. Related is the question of health, and as that is now first and foremost on people's minds, whether we can connect a reduction in congestion to positive long-term health effects. We also talked about just the need to be sensitive to people's current experience and mindful, given how difficult this period is for people, and not wanting to, or being difficult at least, to be talking about something that's going to add cost in a time that people are really struggling. There was also discussion about monitoring what is actually going on and looking at data around, sorry about the screeching in the background, I don't know if you can hear that, but the traffic being so low currently, like what's the impact on air quality? How is that affecting health now, so that we can use that to inform our work? And also there was discussion of whether we should reframe and change the study name from congestion pricing to something else, and mobility pricing was one suggestion. And lastly, there was discussion of whether, as transit agency budgets are really struggling, whether this would need to be something where we think about it as a source of transit revenue. So I think those captured many of the main points. Does anybody from our group want to raise your hand and add anything else that I missed? All right, I'm not seeing anyone. So let's move on to group 4. Eric and Priyoti.
Yeah. Thanks. So our discussion, actually discussed not that much about the outreach and the outreach ideas that were presented. Our discussion focused a little bit more on policy and some of the potential policy considerations for congestion pricing. One member of my group pointed out that he wanted to make sure, or that he would like to see congestion pricing implemented sooner rather than later. I think he had concerns about, the timeline of the study stretching out. He pointed to a concern about hopefully having congestion pricing before robocars, autonomous vehicles became much more common, particularly autonomous vehicles that might be used by Uber and Lyft. Emphasizing that congestion pricing should be in place and out in front of that trend. Another member of Group 4 pointed to China as something to consider with regards to where they're seeing easing for stay-at-home mandates. They're seeing car traffic come back much faster than anticipated, and that we should keep that in mind with regards to what we might see as our new normal, or as some sort of a recovery from the stay-at-home orders. And the same person brought up the idea that congestion pricing can bring in revenue for transportation, that we can't lose sight of that. This person also commented that we said earlier that we would not be pursuing congestion pricing amidst a recession. And this person pointed out, yes, and let's keep in mind that congestion pricing can be a very good source of revenue for public transit. So not to let the idea of a recession get in the way of keeping that in mind as well. And another idea that came up was that revenue is not properly presented in the goals. And I think this person had some ideas about how we reflect revenues in our goals as part of the study. And I welcome any member of Group 4 to raise your hand or add to anything that I just reported out.
Great, thanks, Eric. And we'll wait a minute to see if anybody from Group 4 has any additions. And I don't see anyone. So thanks really to everyone for joining this discussion and sharing your thoughts. I think we're all struggling with some of the uncertainty that we feel all around us about how this is going to affect all kinds of aspects of how our lives and the world progresses. So we're going to, I think this is a lot of great food for thought for us as we continue kind of figuring out how this is going to shape our outreach plans going forward and the program ideas that we're looking for and how we are kind of framing this whole effort and its relationship to everything else that we all in the city are working on. So we will take all that feedback in, and I'll note that the notes from all of those sessions will be, as well as the public session, will be part of the notes from this meeting as well. So you'll all get to see, if you want in more detail, what everyone was talking about. So then let's move on to our next agenda item, which is our goals and metrics, which we have, of course, discussed at both of the previous meetings. And so we are going to move to a vote on these is the plan. So here is just a little refresher of how we've gotten to where we are today. Looking back to December, which again feels a long time ago, we had presented an initial set of 7 draft goals to the PAC, and we heard from you that you wanted to see that set of goals refined into something that was smaller and more focused on things that congestion pricing could really achieve, that it should be based more on existing city policies, and also that you wanted to see more details about how we would evaluate each goal. So we took that feedback and in February shared a revised and much more fleshed out set of goals and metrics with the goals refined down to 4, and we shared that with you together with metrics for each goal. And we had breakout sessions with lots of great feedback. And I think what we heard overall was that the 4 goal areas we presented then were basically the right buckets of things we should be trying to pursue. And there was various feedback focused on how we're wording the goals and the metrics and different elements that you'd want to see included in the program or our process. So we've now developed a revised set of goals and metrics in the document that we shared with you on Monday. And we also shared a memo describing the key pieces of feedback that we heard in February and then how we are and have responded to that feedback. So given all of that thinking that has gone into these so far, we're hoping that we can keep our agenda item today relatively short, since we've heard a lot of feedback from both the previous meetings and also from our one-on-one discussions with you that most of you feel that you're ready to move forward with these today. And then we can use those for the basis of our scenario development and our screening process that we are going to talk to you about next. So we want to leave time to talk about that. So we'll have some time for verbal discussion here. We do want to keep it relatively brief if we can, but you're also welcome to share any additional thoughts or feedback you have either in the verbal discussion or also in the together with your vote. So we plan to have a vote on the version of the document in front of you, but we can still take more feedback that you have and incorporate it in to the overall study process in different ways. So with that, here are the 4 goals, and the 4 of these are essentially the same as the 4 overall goal buckets that we heard were about right last time. We did strengthen the language on the equity goal because we heard a suggestion that we should make that stronger, and we thought that was a good idea. We also heard feedback from some of you about making sure the first goal is about moving people and goods that we're trying to move rather than just traffic itself. So we think that's important. So it is in the goal language, but we also know from the survey that we've done that congestion as an idea that or a problem that needs to be solved did resonate with people, and we also thought that keeping traffic in there was consistent with previous PAC feedback to keep the goal simple and focused. And as you can see in the feedback and response memo, we've made some additional changes to some of the metrics. And then there's also feedback that we thought could be incorporated into our study process in other ways, like into program scenarios. And I'm being reminded that I should move the slide forward. Thank you. And we've tried to keep the metrics focused on key success outcomes towards our goals so that we have the ability to project it for different scenarios. So there are some things that could be incorporated into the study process in other ways, such as we're thinking about the investments we may want to make or ways that they could help us reach the outcomes. And we can also think about ways to evaluate success when we think about the implementation plan once a program is implemented. So there may be some measures that could be before or after study items, even if they would be difficult to project for future scenarios. So again, these are the 4 goals, and you can see them here, and they are covered in more detail in the memo as well. So with that, our next item is PAC discussion. So for this, we can start with any clarifying questions about the process and the goals, and then we can move into more general discussion if people have other feedback. And again, you can either share feedback verbally at this point, or together with a vote in written form as well. So if any PAC members have thoughts or want to get anything out into the discussion, or starting with any clarifying questions, you want to raise your hand and I can unmute you. I see that Peter has. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, it's not a clarifying question.
You're not following the rules, Peter.
Well, you know.
Go ahead.
If you want to go for clarifying questions first, I'll wait.
Go ahead.
I was concerned, you know, I'm concerned that I think the 4 goals that you have are fine, but I think, you know, whether we need a 5th one or not, I think there's a problem that the revenue and cost issues are not incorporated in here at all. And, you know, I actually went back and looked through all 50 pages that you sent out, and that question did come up several times in the earlier discussions. It's also, interestingly, came up in several of the groups in our discussions today already. And, you know, I know that London in particular made sure that, you know, derives a significant amount of revenue and reinvested that into major increases in transit service. And I don't think we can just be sanguine, you know, take for granted that there will be enough revenue generated to do the things that we want to do. So there are a lot of ways to approach this. You know, and one way would be, you know, to have a goal that says something is the program self-sustaining in terms of generating at a minimum enough revenue to cover its costs. For instance, most significantly, if there is increased transit service required to carry additional riders, then there, you know, or additional service that we think should be provided, ideally, that revenue should be generated by the revenues brought in by the program. And if a specific alternative is not able to bring in the revenue at a minimum to pay for the programs that it requires to be in place, that would certainly be a shortcoming of an evaluation of that program. You know, so. And whether we want to use this as a revenue source to put additional transit on the street in addition to that, that would be over and above, you know, but I think how much revenue we bring in, how it matches up to the costs, you know, is a major goal that we need to look at in evaluating any particular alternative. You know, so I think the metric would be how the revenues compare to the cost of the program. And again, I would define it as something like, you know, whether the program is sustainable, self-sustainable.
Thanks, Peter. And so I'll just maybe quickly respond to that. And basically how we've approached this, and maybe this is something that will become a little clearer when we talk about the scenario screening analysis, because essentially how we are thinking about the program is as a holistic package where the fee is one element and then investments, including in things like transit service or other things that, that we can define, are basically both part of the overall package. And so I think we're envisioning that we would propose a program where where those things do have to line up, and that the success of the program and how it achieves the goals and the metrics that we are looking to achieve and are documented in this set that you have, would be reflective of all of those elements of the package in terms of the three elements being the fee, the discounts and exemptions, and investments. And so all of those things basically do need to balance out. Any other thoughts that PAC members feel like we need to share in a verbal comment? And I am not seeing any hands raised. So in that case, I think we can move on to public comment. So then what we will do now is take public comment. And so this will be public comment just on the goals and metrics. We'll have another public comment period at the end of the meeting for any more general questions, comments, et cetera, from the public. And so there are two ways to give a public comment. We'll open up the public chat. So you can submit a comment via the chat window, or you can raise your hand and I can call on you, and we will, you'll have 1 minute to give your comment if you choose to do a verbal comment. So please do go ahead and raise your hand if you want to give a verbal comment. All right, and I am not seeing any verbal comments. It looks like we do have one comment that folks can see they're submitted in the chat window, and a second coming in. So some general concerns about whether this is a solution looking for a problem, and also someone saying that they're grateful that equity is included in the goals. Okay, well then, if there aren't further comments, let's move on to the vote. And so, okay. So here is the voting slide, and this will be our first virtual voting process. So once again, an experiment, please bear with us. And so some of these things are familiar from things we've shown you before, though. So as a reminder, the way we do voting is through a numeric process. So you can hedge a little bit. You don't have to say I'm all in or I like none of this. You can give us we can take your temperature of how supportive you are, ranging from 5 being highly supportive to 1 being serious concerns. And if the average vote is below a 3, which is neutral, then we'll need to identify some next steps to make sure that we approve this item, and we would need to schedule a special session in order to be able to do that. So the other thing you can do if you have serious concerns from an equity perspective is you can raise an equity flag that either privately on your in the vote chat or publicly. So the way we're going to do voting is you can submit your vote to Kim. She will be our vote counting master. So you can find her in the drop down in the chat window. And the things to submit with your vote would be your name, the organization you're representing on the PAC, your 1 through 5 vote number, and then you can also feel free to give us any other comments that you have, whether it's something that you really like or something that's a reservation that's keeping you from voting 5. And then we can continue to be thinking about those items. And then, so chat is definitely the best way to vote, or if you're not able to do it that way, you can text with the number here, 415-930-3132, and we can count your vote that way. So please do submit your votes to Kim, and then we will then repeat back who has voted, just so that we make sure that we have counted all the votes from people who think they have voted, and then we can calculate what the average vote is. And I will ask Kim to let us know when it looks like the number of votes coming in is waning.
Hi everyone, right now I'm writing down all your votes, so bear with me. Colin, someone has a question. If there's 2 people from one organization attending, do they each count for half a vote, or does only one of them get to vote?
Good question. I think we do want to keep it to 1 vote per organization. So I'll leave it to the members of the organization to decide who should vote. So please do only submit 1 vote per organization.
Okay, so far I have Angie Kongsbo, Evan Orovic, Chris Mann, Amy Hartman, Tiffany Chu, Christina Olag, James Ford, Rajni Banthia, J.R. Epler, Sarah Jo, Sazam, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, Janice Lee, Josh, Carlin Resnick, Peter Strauss, slash Zach, Jessica Lum, Pyra, Miro Moganan, Bruce Ajid, Hannah Sreger, Haley Courier, Chris Pangolin, Amit, and then Bree, Jody, Steve, Chris. I think that's everyone. If we haven't counted your vote, make sure to chat it to me. I'll give you a few more seconds. Amit, I did get your vote. Thanks. Okay, I think that's everyone. Oh, someone asked, did we get Sarah? Oh, okay. Thank you, Sarah. All right. Now, if that's everyone. Yes. Okay. It looks like the average vote is 4.1.
And I think just a clarification, we did decide just to be conservative there where 2 people voted for one organization just to use the low of the 2 numbers to be conservative with the average.
That's what I did.
Okay, well, yeah, so thank you. And so that gives us something that's a little above I like this, short of I'm highly supportive. So I think, and it averages to I like this. So really appreciate that and hope that, you know, and we'll certainly look at any additional comments that we got together with those votes moving forward. Kim, do you know how many total votes there were?
Yeah, give me one.
Yeah, we have a question about that. Okay, so well, that concludes the goals and metrics. So we will move forward with those and use those as the basis as we get into our analysis of different scenarios. So that brings us really to our next agenda item.
Looks like there's 20.
Which is the scenario. Go ahead, Kim.
Looks like there's 24 from a speed count.
Great, thank you. Okay, so let's move on to the next agenda item then. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate your bearing with us here. It's a little slower to count these in the digital realm. So I am going to turn it over to Drew from our Technology Data and Analysis group and our technical guru on the study to walk us through our proposed scenario screening process. So basically how we're going to look at lots of different possible scenarios for congestion pricing, and we are very interested in hearing your feedback on this. So go ahead, Drew.
Thanks, Colin. So we'll just start off by reminding everybody where we are in the overall arc of the study. Next slide, please. So prior to this, we had engaged with you, the PAC, separately through outreach and co-creation sessions with members of the public and also technical advisory committee to get feedback and on goals and objectives, as well as elements that people would like to see studied as components of the congestion pricing program. We have used that in step 3 to basically define the parameters that we're going to look at in what we are referring to as the screening analysis. The purpose of the screening analysis is to kind of examine a pretty broad range of things so that we can see what works and what doesn't, what gets us to our goals and what doesn't, and then take that information and kind of narrow things down to a set of things that we will look at in step 5. So in step 4, we'll kind of further refine the things that work, do additional outreach to figure out what we're missing and kind of build up more complete project definitions. Step 5 will analyze those. And finally, after analyzing, there will ultimately be a recommendation. Next slide, please. So what we have envisioned is essentially a 3-step process. In each step, we will consider a set of variables that define a congestion pricing program, starting with kind of more fundamental components and moving into things that kind of build on top of that. At each phase, we will kind of be asking a series of questions. First, or running through a series of steps, first kind of establishing what the options that we're going to look at are, evaluate them relative to goals and objectives, identify and remove fatally flawed or underperforming alternatives, and then advance the ones that are working best. So in round 1, what we're calling our basic design round, this is where we look at the geography. And so we are starting with the geography that was recommended in the 2010 congestion pricing study. And we will also consider an alternative, likely smaller alternative zone that we will develop based on further outreach. We will consider a variety of configurations that relate to the way that the charge might be assessed. So a typical configuration in some places is an inbound cordon charge where you would pay a fee to drive into the zone. In addition to that, we'll also look at a bidirectional cordon charge, which was the recommendation of the 2010 study, where you would pay crossing in both directions. A peak direction cordon charge, which is basically inbound in the morning and outbound in the evening. An area charge, which applies not only for crossing the boundary, but also trips that are happening in the zone, and a per mile charge. We will test a variety of prices and hours of operation, including peak period and daytime operation. For all of these configurations and hours of operation, the basic question that we're asking is, what is the right price that gets us to 15% reduction in vehicle trips coming from our goals? And then we will, once we have kind of determined what the right price point is, we will use the outcomes of our analysis to determine how well those scenarios also measure up to our other goals. So coming out of round 1, we will have kind of dialed in the right price and configuration, and then we will add on top of that investments. And so what we're going to look at here primarily is investments in transit service, with the idea being that in order to support congestion pricing, where we are incentivizing people to get out of their cars and into alternative modes, that will need to be supportive with transit investments. So again, those investments will draw down some of the available revenue, and so that may lead to us needing to basically rebalance whatever the appropriate target price is. Again, keeping in mind the 15% vehicle trip reduction. Here, we will also be looking at how different levels of investment in transit service affect travelers in communities of concern and different income groups. So after round two, having identified some scenarios that build investments on top of the basic design, then we will move into considering discounts and exemptions. And the types of discounts and exemptions that we're going to look at are means-based, so based on income, discounts for people who live inside the congestion pricing zone, possibly a rebate for people who have crossed one of the bridges and are paying 2 tolls. We'll consider a daily maximum charge and a discount for people with disabilities. We'll also look at means-based discount for transit. In the bottom right, we have some special cases. So the first one, outbound Cordon PM only, is the looking back at the 2010 congestion pricing study. This was the recommendation for a pilot implementation of what congestion pricing might look like in a kind of early rollout. Looking back through that document, it doesn't measure up against the goals that we've laid out for ourselves in this study, but we want to answer the question anyway: how does that pilot recommendation from the last study play out based on our updated analysis? The other special case is that we have heard a lot of questions about TNCs and the amount of congestion that they contribute, and what would it take to basically achieve our goals only pricing TNCs. And so we'll seek to answer that question as well. Next slide, please. So this diagram is a kind of conceptual look at what this process looks like. So, starting on the left, imagine this is a tree that's growing some branches, and each shape here basically represents a different configuration that gets refined and expanded in each round, and then some of those things move on and some of them don't. So, so you can see that the pentagon never really took root. It didn't pass our initial screening in the first round, and so it doesn't move on. Whereas the circle generated 3 branches, and then we pruned one of those out because it also didn't meet our goals. And so in this way, we're kind of expanding the universe of scenarios that we're looking at, but at each step only moving forward what is meeting our goals. Next slide, please. So again, this is the kind of in the end of step 3 phase, where we are we have figured out the parameters that we are interested in looking at, and we're starting to and how we're going to evaluate what success looks like, and then we are starting to do that analysis now. And the results of it are expected to be the main topic for our, or a topic for our next PAC meeting. So with that, I'll hand it back to, well, I guess we'll go to discussion, and happy to take your questions.
Yeah, thanks, Drew. So we'll have first PAC member discussion. And so I see that Haley has already raised her hand, and others are welcome to do the same. So go ahead, Haley.
Thanks for walking us through that, Drew. I'm not entirely clear. What I guess the outcome I'm trying to understand, if this is incorporated into this plan, is with the basic. Can you go back to that first slide with the basic? Yeah. So trying to figure out how to get to 15% reduction with the basic design, and then is the fact that when you add more transit or more bike infrastructure or bike share or other options for getting downtown, that would change someone's willingness to pay for driving downtown. Like, if there's no good option, my willingness to pay to get downtown is going to be higher than if there's another option that's cheaper and better and faster. So is that incorporated in how this is done?
So I guess with round 2 and round 3, the question of the kind of refinement is a little bit different. With investments, transit service investments in particular, those really kind of work with you in favor of encouraging mode shift. And so it's probably not going to eat away at the 15% vehicle trip reduction, but we might end up with a situation. Well, there are two things kind of at odds. One is we might be charging people an amount of money that is now higher than is necessary to meet that 15% vehicle or trip reduction. But we also might be looking at a situation where we're not fully funding the investments. And so we need to balance all of those things there. So we need to be able to make sure that we're funding the service that we're putting out, but we also don't want to be overcharging people more than we need to. With round 3, when we're starting to talk about discounts, this is a little bit more clear cut. When you lower the price for a group of people, you can expect them to be to drive more, and so giving a discount to a subset of people might lead to the necessity of increasing the price for the rest of the people.
Does that answer your question, Haley? Okay.
Haley's on mute. One more question, or follow-up, I think.
Okay, yeah, just wondering if I asked one follow-up. So it sounds like through the 3 steps, eventually you will get to the point where you're balancing like increased demand, essentially. Like the fact that the price might be lower when you have increased demand for transit. It sounds like the answer to my question was yes, that concern is incorporated. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, we're balancing the desire to not overcharge people, the desire to get 15% reduction in vehicle trips, and the need to support that with transit and to be able to pay for that transit.
Okay, great, thank you.
And I'll just add the other criterion that, which is part of not overcharging people, is with the discounts and exemptions part, making sure that we're getting to a point where we're not increasing costs for low-income folks. Okay, thanks, Haley. So JR had his hand up next. So it looks like JR, you are unmuted. So go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. And looking at the basic design, I understand from a intellectual level why you would want to analyze or reanalyze the 2010 recommended area. Now, from my read of the 2010 report, 2010 recommended area is the northeast cordon area, which has a southern boundary at 18th Street. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah, so there's, thinking about this from a kind of political feasibility standpoint, even if it's an intellectual exercise, I think placing the cordon area at 18th Street will cause a lot of consternation and feedback among those neighborhoods that are essentially split in two by selecting that boundary line. And you have a little bit of an easier row to hoe as a part of this process if you either move that line further north or further south so that you didn't go straight down through a commercial area. That was one of the major issues that this neighborhood had with the 2010 study, is that it would essentially split it into right along one of its principal commercial corridors. And any sniff of that, it's a lot like the study that was done by the planning department on the Caltrain extension to downtown and the potential rollback of the 280 corridor. As much as you may like the idea of rolling back the 280 corridor, if you include that as part of the study, it's the tail wagging the dog, and you lose the thing that you're trying to achieve by having something in there that's highly controversial. And so I understand why why it's easier to look at the 2010 recommendation area, why intellectually it makes sense, but I think it's a little bit of a political landmine for District 10 and likely District 9 to consider that area as one of the things that you start with.
Colin, do you want to respond?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I can just, so I think, so one of the reasons that geography is on this list is that we recognize that certainly the 2010 recommended area, I think we want to test it because it can provide a point of comparison. Also, we did look at lots of different scenarios in 2010 and up to that point. And we know that there were concerns about different parts of the border. But we also did find that there were significant benefits that came along with that scenario. So I think the reason there's a smaller alternative area on here is that we're thinking that based on the benefits that the 2010 study showed, it probably wouldn't need to be a lot bigger. It probably would need to be about the definition of the 2010 zone, but we're also interested in whether there's something that could achieve some of the same benefits while adjusting the boundaries on different sides. And certainly we have heard from your comment that the 18th Street boundary is problematic. And so I think, we want to do this for the screening analysis. We'll then get to the point where we can look at more detailed alternatives. And I think we can, we can have several of those, and we can see how a smaller area would perform, and that can inform what we ultimately are looking at in terms of those more refined alternatives, and what they should be looking like.
And this is Rachel. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and if what we're talking about, JR, maybe is just a sort of a micro change, such as we're talking about 17th Street instead of 18th Street, like that's something, let's take that back to the team and talk about that. Because I think that's something that we
Yeah, and maybe, so I think we would be interested in kind of if, in any input there is on what would be a better boundary, so that we can use that to help shape what other options we can look at or should be looking at. So please do kind of share your thoughts and anyone else share their thoughts on what we should be looking at. Okay, and I see Peter has his hand raised. Go ahead, Peter.
Thanks, Colin. I guess I don't want us to put ourselves in a box where we are deciding now that if, for instance, we divert 20% of cars, that we're diverting too many, you know, or if we have high revenue return, we're collecting too much. I think we want to see those evaluations, but you know, if we're diverting 20% of our cars and collecting enough revenue to meet our goals, maybe we want to go that route. I don't want to prejudge at this point how we respond to our evaluations. If we're collecting, you know, even if we meet our minimum transit service costs, if we can collect additional revenue, we might want to consider whether we want to use this as a revenue source beyond that, especially, you know, looking at the costs that our transit systems are going to be facing over the next several years. I mean, there are a lot of unknowns, but the way things look, again, you know, I think we have good goals and evaluation metrics, but I don't want us to pre-decide at this point how we will respond to what our findings are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you for the comment. So the criteria that we've used here come from the goals that were just adopted. And that is kind of our guiding principle for how we move from one round to another. I think that we can be open to, you know, holistic in the way that we look at the outcomes of what we're seeing.
Yeah, I don't know how others view that, but for instance, I view the 15% as a minimum that we want to achieve, not as a level that we absolutely want to balance at.
Okay. Thanks, Peter. If, certainly we can see if anybody has other thoughts on that. And let me unmute Amit because he had having trouble raising his hand. Go ahead, Amit. You should be unmuted. Unless you are calling in separately from a different number.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, thank you, Colin. Somehow unmute didn't work, but I'm glad I'm on. So my apologies to bring this up. I haven't been part of this committee before. So if this has been discussed, my apologies. But as far as the investments in transit services, are we considering investment in transit across the board, including many other transit services within the city, AC Transit, Samtrans, or this is more focused at Muni?
Maybe I can quickly answer that and just say that it's definitely something we want to be thinking about, both the local and regional travel options. And we know that about 3/4 of drivers are come into San Francisco or northeastern San Francisco from within the city, and the other quarter come regionally. And so, we want to make sure that everyone has options, including good transit options, to be making the trips they need to make.
Okay, thank you.
I don't see any other hands raised. Any other folks have thoughts or comments who are members of the PAC? And we will get to public comment next. Okay, well, that is all the comments folks on the PAC have. Then appreciate that discussion, and certainly if you have any further thoughts, we are interested to hear them, so feel free to send us a message. And with that, let's talk briefly about next steps, and then we'll have public comment. So just our next steps, and we've kind of talked about some of these already at this meeting. First of all, we'll continue coordinating with our CBO partners to identify the kind of appropriate time and methods of outreach to be doing. And I think we've heard some input from you all today and in our one-on-ones about different ways that we can and should be doing our outreach, and also thinking about how we're framing the study, so we can be thinking about those things as we do that as well. And then Drew and all of us will be working on evaluating some of these initial scenarios with the goal of trying to identify which of those are look like they would best meet the goals using the metrics that you all voted on and passed today. So we will move forward with that. And then our goal is to bring back to you at our next meeting, which we have penciled in on the calendar on June 18th, some of those, the results from that screening analysis, so we can see how the different, all the different elements and targets that we're trying to meet would work out with different combinations of the different scenario options we're looking at. So those are the kind of immediate next steps for the study in moving us forward on that timeline that Drew discussed. And maybe I'll just ask any PAC members who have quick questions about the next steps before we move on to public comment. You raise your hand. Okay, and I don't see any, so let's move on to our last agenda item, which is public comment. And again, this will work the same way it did before, which is we have, you can submit public comment via the chat window, and you can also raise your hand to give a verbal comment, and we'll ask that you keep that to 1 minute, just in case we have a number of people who want to speak. So I see that Barbara Inaba has her hand raised, so go ahead, Barbara. Barbara, are you able to, I've tried to unmute you here, but I can't hear you. Okay, so Barbara, I can't hear you. So if you're having a technical difficulty here, please feel free to chat Paige or Abe in the chat window, or send them a text message. And maybe I'll just ask Paige if she can send you a quick message with the number to text if you are having technical difficulties. Any other members of the public who want to raise their hands to give us any thoughts? All right. Well, I'm not seeing any. It looks like Barbara has lowered her hand. Oh, yes.
Roland submitted a question earlier. Thank you for the reminder, Roland. So MTC recently suspended congestion charging on all bridges. What is the impact of this suspension on the SFCTA standard?
Well, this is a good question. And actually, also, we've been monitoring what's been going on in other cities that have congestion pricing, and possibly among others, but London has a congestion pricing program, as we discussed in one of the optional sessions, and they have also suspended congestion charging in their downtown zone during the pandemic, so that given that there is no congestion, and also that they want to make sure that people who are essential and if it's safer for them to be driving, that they can be doing that. So I think basically that points to the idea that congestion pricing can be flexible, and that certainly we wouldn't want to implement a congestion pricing program in the middle of a pandemic or a recession. So, our idea is, we want to be ready so that when the economy and congestion are likely to return, we are ready to try to address it, but we wouldn't be implementing it, in conditions like this.
Can you give Barbara a try again?
And it looks like, yeah. Barbara, I've just pressed unmute. Can you speak now?
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay, great. Yeah, hi, thank you. I just had a few comments, and that is regarding the plan on the hours of operation. It's just not the peak period. It also has to be like peak and event, because in that area, since 2010, there's been so much development. And so if there's peak compounded with events, they can be Chase Center events and the ballpark events. And it gets to be bizarre around here. And on weekends too. So it shouldn't just be limited to commuters, morning and afternoon commutes. So I think that should be added in. And then also regarding that 2010 geographic area, those are that whole area. There's a lot of distinct areas. So as I mentioned in my other comments a couple of meetings ago, there should be like sub-zone areas. And my third question is, my third comment question is, after the recommended study is presented, will whatever the city does implement, will that go through a CEQA process?
Thanks, Barbara. Definitely some good questions. So I think the first one, in terms of the non-commute hours congestion, we have focused on commute periods, and but certainly there could be options to charge during other periods. I think another way to approach this is if there's a system in place, it could be piloted, and we could see how it works kind of when in the normal commute periods, and then there could be further discussion if it's implemented and successful about whether to expand it. And then certainly the zone is something that's focused on the Northeast, and we can look at a couple options for that.
Well, sub-zones, sub-zones within the zones.
Yeah, I think the main thing there is we did look at options in the last 2010 study for kind of a dual ring option, which wasn't very popular in discussions with the public, in part because people were concerned that it would be too complicated. So I think that's maybe another case where there, you know, and what we've seen in other cities that have implemented congestion pricing is, you know, they often do try to start with something a little simpler, and then, you know, once people kind of understand how that works and if it's supported and successful, then, you know, you can add, for example, a lot of the European cities add an emissions control zone that has some different boundaries. So, you know, maybe something that you could add complexity to once something's in place that people understand and if people like how it's working. And you had a third question, which was, CEQA. So there likely would need to be some level of environmental review, and that's something, you know, but we'd have to look at what that is, and it would probably depend on a number of factors, including what kind of technology and you know, implementation is going into place. So that's something that when we get into the implementation plan, we can identify what level of environmental review the recommended option might need.
One more comment regarding one more comment regarding the real quick, please, regarding the event and the peak pricing is SFMTA already has for their parking meters in my neighborhood that the parking meter rates go up higher when there's more demand and more event activities. I live in the Rincon Hill area, and you know, the parking meter prices go up, they surge up. So I mean, you could actually you know, communicate with your own department organization and how they can monitor that or figure out for higher congestion pricing and coming into the zone, because that would deter cars from driving in from all over the Bay Area, even from out of state for all these events.
Yeah, well, I think once again, that's kind of a case where we could start with something that is simpler, and there are other examples like Stockholm where charging does vary depending on sort of the peak of the peak has higher fees than the shoulders of the peak period. So it does vary over time. So that, you know, that's something that we could consider. I think we are trying to keep it relatively simple now. Do any other members of the public want to raise their hands and add something? And I do see we do have a couple of other comments here in the chat window. One of the concerns is that other cities like London are not comparable. So we did talk a lot about that and some of the case studies in one of our previous sessions on other cities. I think, you know, something that's interesting is, well, certainly other cities, some of them do have extensive rail transit systems, including London, obviously, much more extensive than San Francisco. A lot of the increase in transit ridership that happens in those cities with a congestion pricing program is actually bus ridership, because the buses are so much more effective once congestion pricing helps them move through the city streets more efficiently. And I also do, you know, we can acknowledge that there are some concerns expressed with the with our modeling tools. And that is in the chat window. Any other comments that folks have in our last minute or two here? Okay.
Hi,
well,
sorry, this is Rachel. Sorry, can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Yeah, maybe one of the comments was about border zones, and maybe you could say something about how we'll look at the traffic effects on streets surrounding the zone area.
Yeah, sure. Thanks for catching that, Rachel. So yeah, that was something that also was looked at quite a bit in the 2010 study as well, and wanting to make sure that we don't basically reduce traffic within a congestion pricing zone, but just push it to border zones right outside the zone and create new or worse problems there. So one of the things that has been a finding from other cities with congestion pricing is that actually even the areas right outside the zone tend to have reduced traffic just because there's so much less traffic going in and out of the congestion pricing zone. But the design of the zone is a key factor there, because if you make a zone that is too small so that there aren't that many people trying to get into the zone, but a lot of people trying to go around it, then you can end up with issues at the zone. Or for example, if you only include some freeway ramps but not others in the downtown area, then people might be trying to cluster at the ramps that don't have a fee. So that's definitely something we need to watch for when we're designing a program, and particularly when we're looking at the geography of a program. But that is something that, as we look at different, a couple of options for the boundaries of the zone, that we'll definitely want to keep an eye on whether they are causing any issues with congestion right outside the boundary. Okay, other things that I may have missed, Rachel, or others on the team? I don't see any raised hands. Okay. Well, I think that concludes our meeting then. Really appreciate everyone joining us tonight and sending us your comments and thoughts. Hope that everyone is staying healthy and